I'm Brad Levitt, AFT Construction. We have a great guest with us today, Tom Trythall. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Brad. It's an honor.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. So Tom is president and owner of Lost Creek, and we've been connected for a while now through social media at the Builder events, and another Builder 20 guy, even though we're not really in the same Builder 20, but we both sure benefit from our groups.
Definitely. It's one of those things that if I could go back and start over again, I would have joined the Builder 20 group 7 or 8 years earlier than I did.
So it's funny, we've spent some time on this. I've had a couple of guys from my group and some others. We've talked about it. How long have you been in your Builder 20 group for?
Not quite 2 years.
And how did you join? Like, how did you even find them?
So I actually knew about the Builder 20 group for quite a while, and I actually tried to reach out to a couple. I wasn't sure how to join. And then, life got busy and I kind of forgot about it for a while. And it was, I guess, a little over 2 years ago, Dan Duvall with Dan Duvall Builders in Ohio, who you've had on before, reached out through social media. And just they're in a transition period where they were losing a few members and looking to grow. He reached out through Instagram and we connected, and both Dan and Mike Connolly and I, we joined at the same time through invitations from Dan. And so we had our first meetings together and went through the first financial review together. And so it's been good, but it's been a game changer for us for sure.
Well, it's interesting. I know one thing that you and I have spoken about, and we were even messaging each other before the podcast here. And one of the things that was a common thread, at least for me in my career, and I know you said this too, is just that our industry is lacking. It's lacking information, how to run a business. And this is why, not why I started the podcast. I mean, it seems that the podcast is kind of driven this way on business owners, and not just related to construction, but just other entrepreneurs in general, because the fact of the matter is we're business owners that happen to do construction. And that's something I didn't really understand, especially starting the business, right? You're just consumed in learning everything you can about building sites or construction, or, it's a complicated business, but we don't understand how to run the business. And there's not really resources because you and I are competing for the same business, at least in our local markets. And that's where, this is one of those few resources that's out there for us.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things that I think, again, as I mentioned, is a game changer. For that exact reason, for me, the Builder 20 has been, just having a resource of guys that have. We have everything. I feel like we have a pretty stacked group, so I feel pretty lucky to have been invited to that group. But you've got a board of directors basically that, they've been through everything. We've got guys that. In our group, that one of them, Manetti Custom Homes, is out of New Jersey, celebrating 75 years in business this next year. They've been through everything. And so having that, just that group that you can go to and, hey, I'm dealing with this and I don't know how to do it, or I've got a client who's, handling something this way. Any suggestions, in addition to meeting twice a year that I know you've talked about on here before, we just came from our fall meeting in Wisconsin, but we also have a monthly Zoom call. There's a email, listserv type thing that we communicate almost on a daily basis. Somebody's asking a question or thrown out there. So it's just a huge resource for anything and everything, whether it's how to run the business. There's an email going around this last week just about, somebody asked, what are your top, what's your top favorite new item that you're putting in your homes, trying to take our building to a new standard. And so it's just been super inspiring for me to just see how other organizations are run, how they're handling things. Everybody runs it a little bit different. And so you take the information and kind of adapt it to best suit your team. But it's definitely been an absolute blessing to participate. And you just you become friends with everybody. I was texting Mike with Greenside this weekend, asking about family. He's got some daughters doing some amazing things, and so it's really just almost an extension of your family. And they care about you. They care about your business. They want you to be successful, and they're gonna hold you accountable as well.
What I love about that, especially what you're saying there, Thomas, what's interesting is when I've attended the events similar to you, I mean, we have the Zoom meetings, which are great, and we kind of check in with each other. And all the time. Like we have a group email and even a group text chain, right? So a question comes up or an issue, or maybe I know one of our builders was asking like, hey, I'm doing my first remodel. Do you have any remodel templates? And then fire away, like 6 people fire away stuff, right? But the big thing is, here's the reality. Like construction, I say this so many times on podcasts, it's so tough, right? Running a business is so difficult. Like we're dealing with so many issues, especially now. Like it's harder to build a house today than ever before. We're at risk all the time. But what I find is you get that bolt of energy, right? That charge. Like I go meet with the group and I'm like, I just feel like I'm here networking. Everyone's kind of dealing with similar issues to some extent. And it's never like a pity party. That's not what this is. It's like you're uplifting each other. Like, okay, here's how we're getting through this. Here's what we're doing, and looking around corners. And I think specifically to me, and maybe think about this, like just some specific examples, how the group has helped you, Tom, is that I wasn't really sure, we've moved all the cost plus. I didn't really know how to do that previously, right? And we had a couple of builders that do this exclusively. They sat down with my controller. They trained my whole team, like for 4 hours on a call on how to do it and how they manage it. I mean, that information, it's like, where are you going to get that? Like anywhere. And I could hire business coaches or outside people, but how many of them are running a construction company that's doing 50 million a year that says, this is how we do it and we've been doing it? And that information like is just priceless, right? And similar to you is that I have a builder in my group, Richard Jaffa, with Jaffa Group in Park City, and he's like in his 80s. Every time I go, I just sit by him because I get like 10 nuggets every conference, because he's been building for like 60 years, from a house he did for like 15,000 to a house he did for like 26 million, right? And you just see this vast career.
Yeah, for sure. That's again, it's one of those things that you can't put a value on the education that you gain from these things. Just to share, we just had ours 2 weeks ago, our last meeting, and visited Colby Construction, who's run by Pete Feitmeyer out of Delafield, Wisconsin. And Pete's been an awesome resource. He's kind of one of those, from the beginning, just a huge mentor. He's offline. We've shared things. He's shared templates. He's shared his company organizational structure. That we talk about. Even just his growth. He's probably 10, 15 years ahead of where I am right now, or where I feel like I am right now. And yet, he's sent me everything from he's put me in touch with his controller, how to handle the accounting side of business, how to even, that we have an annual financial review where everybody compares numbers, and those numbers need to be accurate and for them to be helpful to the entire group. And so he's been super, super helpful. Just, basically give you the shirt off his back kind of deal. And they want you to succeed. And it's like, where else would you get that? You can't get it from a business coach. You can't get it from anybody. And yet it's one of those things. I've always admired him, and we were all just blown away. He took us on a tour of the home that they built. It's actually a couple of homes on the same property, and the level of execution, just everything. He took us on a tour of his office, introduced us to his team, his office staff. So every element of this last visit was totally inspiring. On one hand, we did joke a little bit and told him that we all felt like starter home builders.
And you guys built some nice stuff too.
Some of the stuff that we were seeing. And yet, again, he's super humble about it. He's just sharing what got him there. And he was the first to tell him. I asked, again, he's one of those mentors you just look to. And so I've asked him a few questions about, how did you get from where you were when you started with the group to now? And he shared some of those details. He said that after his very first meeting, he had to go back and basically fire his controller because things weren't going well. And that was the first step for him. And then he attributes all of his success to participating in these Builder 20 groups. That's incredible.
And what's interesting, and we'll get into your backstory a little bit later, Tom, in the podcast, but the reality is you broke off like all of us. You break off, you start your company, here you are, and there's so many pain points, right? Like there's just, the failure is part of the process. Ideally, we have relationships with other builders. Social media has helped accelerate this, podcasts, and there's a lot of forums now where we can help, hopefully, like kind of raise the industry to some extent. Where did you find information, training, whether it be scheduling, budgeting, pricing, client communication, all the stuff that goes into running a construction business before the Builder 20?
I will say most of it is the school of hard knocks.
So you're the same as me. So it's not just me that's out there.
And at the same time, you're just like, man, why does it take me so long to do this? We can talk a little bit later, I think we will. My experience, I spent 10 years prior to going off on my own working for my father-in-law, and that was invaluable experience. One of the things he always said, and it was a little bit more of the sink or swim method of teaching. And I had a ton of opportunities and experiences working with him, and he was hugely influential in the success that I enjoyed today. And at the same time, one of the things he always repeated was, do something, even if it's wrong. Don't worry, you'll never lose more money than I've lost in this industry. I don't want to lose money. I don't want to learn the hard way. And yet at the same time, you do. And those are some of the most valuable lessons. And I've worked a little bit with Sean Van Dyke, who I know you know as well. And I know Sean's been quoted as saying, don't look at it as losing money. You're funding your research and development department.
Yeah.
And now
paying for your college. Yeah. You're paying for your college. And the reality is, not only the investment in yourself and business and through the mistakes you make, but also you look at it. Some of us have lost leaders, right? As common sales thing. You have, Costco has their chicken that they lose money on, that everyone goes buy their rotisserie chicken, but then they're buying everything else. We have our lost leaders and projects that maybe didn't pan out, but the education, as long as we optimize that and learn from it and change that, right? But what's interesting about you, Tom, you speak about working for your father-in-law. So I almost want to call the timeout button when you said that, because that's a tough relationship. You get married and then you're working for your father-in-law. Explain that dynamic, how that ended up working out.
For sure. So it's actually, I wish my wife was here because it's even more funny to listen to her tell the story. So she grew up, my father-in-law is a second generation builder. His dad started a company called Spartan Building Corporation down in Louisiana, which is where my wife was born and raised and grew up. Anyway, so he started a company, or worked with his dad. And all my wife ever heard her entire childhood was never work for family. It wasn't the greatest experience for her dad. And just, she kind of felt like it was just drilled into her.
So her dad would always tell her, don't work for family, because he worked for his dad?
He was working for
her grandfather. His
father. Grandfather. And, my wife actually worked a little bit in high school. And as she started college, worked there at the family business. So she knew enough about it that she wouldn't even consider it. So I graduated with a degree in construction management, and it was just after
Where did you go to school?
So I was at BYU.
What year were you there?
I left officially in 2002.
Okay. I don't think I've ever asked you that. Yeah. So I was a little younger. I think I joined the program 2003 or 4 and then finished in 2005. So I just missed you.
Yeah. So I technically left in 2002. I finished in 2003. Had a few independent study classes. But the job market wasn't great at the time that I left. It was just after the attacks
.com.
11.
Yeah.
A little bit of a bubble. So I had a couple of opportunities, and one of them was presented when we went down to visit my in-laws for Christmas that year. My father-in-law offered me a job, and my wife was like, "No way, we're not even thinking about it."
Back in Louisiana?
Yeah. So it was to move back to Louisiana, and I didn't recognize it at the time. I've listened to your podcast enough to know that you've been quoted a few times of saying, you chase experience, not money.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things where I knew and felt like that was the best opportunity for me. I'm a first generation builder from my side of the family, and yet just felt like that would be an amazing opportunity. At the same time, I always knew that I wanted to go into business for myself. My father-in-law knew that I was more interested in residential construction, just my background. It's been a passion, something that I've always been interested in. And yet, so he offered me a job and couldn't get my wife to consider it. And so we talked about it for a while. I kept working on her a little bit at a time. Like, I really think this would be a good idea. We're religious and wanted to make sure it was the right decision. I'm like, will you even just pray about it? And she's like, no way. I know the answer. Eventually she came around and we moved. So we ended up accepting that job, and and moved down to Louisiana. And that definitely jump-started my career. It was one of those things, and my father-in-law was very clear with the rest of the employees. I know he told me after I had been there for a little while, he told me that he pulled everybody else aside before I started. And he's like, look, the only reason I'm hiring this kid is because he's my son-in-law. And, so it didn't totally inspire a whole lot of self-confidence as I was starting, but it was one of those things that was just turned out to be invaluable. We've got a great relationship. And at the same time, it's separating is tough. It was one of those things that's why I ended up working for 10 years before I finally felt like it was time to go off on my own.
And why was that? And I was curious, the entrepreneurial side. I mean, you mentioned that your wife was hesitant, before getting into what kind of triggered you saying, I'm ready to go off on my own. Relationship wise, you mentioned that the training was invaluable. You learned a ton working for your father-in-law and some of the advice he gave you. How was the relationship good? Just understanding kind of your role in the company and how that played with just the family side?
Yeah, there were, I guess, a few different elements there. One of them was just, I don't know, there's always been, even since I was young, always had this desire to create. And one of those things that I've always wanted to create is my own business. And so even stepping into a family business, my brother-in-law was involved in the business as well. It was always, I knew it was always going to be their family business, and I had this desire to create my own. But I also never, when we first moved to Louisiana, I thought, 3 to 4 years of experience and I'll be good to go. And at the same time, just never, after 3 years, I was like, there's no way I'm ready. And that was, just something probably unique and personal to me. I was enjoying what I did. I had a, great job. I was treated well, super comfortable work environment, loved the projects, loved the people on the team. So it was a tough decision for sure. And at the same time, I just always wanted to have something of my own that I could say, hey, this is something that I've created. And so that's really what led to making that decision. I was actually, it was the beginning of the year 2012 that, right around the first of the year, you're setting goals for yourself and looking at the year ahead. And that was the first year where I was, really starting to feel like, hey, this could be time. And then I was actually sitting in a church meeting, and just between what the speaker was talking about and some thoughts that came into my mind, I was just like, you know what, it's time. And it was one of those things where, because of the nature of the family relationship and making that decision, I went home, we talked to my wife about it. We both felt good about some things. And yet we said, okay, so over the course of this next year, we are going to start putting some things in place to go off into business on our own. We knew that we wanted to get a little bit further west, a little closer to some of our family before our kids, wanted to, if we were going to make a move, wanted to do it before our kids got much older.
Too old, yeah.
At the time. And so we said, over the next year, we're going to start making some of these changes. One of the first things we did was invited my in-laws over for dinner. We made dinner for them, and then shared this news. Well, it wasn't super well received. Like I totally became the black sheep of the family. And
well, not only are you like leaving the business, you're taking the grandkids. Like, this is a major blow to the family. So
for sure, I have a much better appreciation now, looking back, and now that my kids are older, of like what we did. And I'm glad my father didn't shoot me, because I now recognize a little bit more about like how hard that may have been. Again, he treated me so well and did so much for me, and still does. But there was a period of time, it was probably a 6 or 8 month process after that, that I felt like I'd ruined that relationship, and yet it's definitely gotten better, and we now are back to the same,
which is awesome,
place we were prior to that. And again, I think about him every day. I besides you and this podcast, he's one that I quote in our team trainings like all the time. So our guys are used to hearing me quote things that I learned from my father-in-law and things that I've learned from Brad's podcast.
Oh, that's awesome.
But
we've had some great guests such as yourself. So
but anyway, that was just all part of the process. Going back to, where we said we made this decision that we were going to do it. but take a year to actually implement this plan. And I think 4 months later, we were living in Colorado.
So why Colorado? I mean, and not only just why, I mean, maybe there's, a personal side of that, but I think more importantly, the complexity. I mean, I was forced into entrepreneurship. I've shared my story on YouTube. I've talked about it on here, but just some life-changing events that happened to me. And here I am forced to start a construction company. But I'm local. Like, at least there were some contacts. I had no idea what I was doing, to be transparent. I've been open about that. Unfortunately, hard work and surround yourself with great people and contact. I mean, that helped. But you're going to a new network where you don't have clients, you don't have designers or architects. Like, you're starting a business, an LLC. There's tax. I mean, the complication. To me, it's not insurmountable. It's just hard to imagine going from Louisiana to Colorado.
It was rough. I can tell you that it wasn't the smoothest deal. But we also, one of the things that was probably the best blessing from my standpoint is my wife has been 100% supportive the entire time. From that standpoint, she never questioned, like, this was a crazy idea. And I did. At the time, I knew 2 people in Colorado Springs. Didn't do any market research. I would love to say that I did, and I knew the demographics, I knew what was going on, but it was really just decisions that were made largely on feeling. And we actually had made the decision that it was Colorado. When we decided to move and leave Louisiana, we narrowed it down to 3 places that we knew we would like to live. Colorado, Texas, and Tennessee. Colorado and Texas made a little more sense because we had family in both places. Tennessee, I don't know why that was on the list other than I've just always liked it.
I love Nashville. Like, Tennessee's great. There's a lot of good areas. Yeah.
And at the same time, those were just kind of where we had narrowed it down and just felt like Colorado was the right place. So we actually came out, and at the time my little brother was living in the Denver area, and my sister lives here in the Colorado Springs area where we are. So, again, not doing any market research, I was like, well, Denver, think about Colorado, that's Denver, and, good market, a lot of people, whatever. Yeah, that's the extent of the market research I did. But we came out, my brother drove us all around town. We came out for about a 24-hour period. He just drove us all over the city, and nothing felt right. I was starting to get overwhelmed by the decision that I had made. Like, what did I do? What is all of this? And we had made set a time to go just come down to Colorado Springs to visit my sister and go out to dinner that night. And as we drove into town, my wife and I both just felt like this was the right place, and everything else, so we made the decision. We moved here. Again, my sister was the only one we knew. So starting from scratch and moving to a new town definitely had its challenges. There were days that I was ready to head back to Louisiana, and I knew all it would take was one phone call to my father-in-law, which added, a little bit. I always had an out in my head, and there were days that were super rough as we got started. I think I've mentioned before, I know I've posted a little bit on it even recently. There was one other guy that I kind of knew in town who was a real estate developer. We had, a couple of years before, we had helped my brother-in-law who lives here buy a building for his orthodontic office. And so I called this guy, just kind of cold called him out of the blue. I said, hey, here's my name, starting a business, moving to Colorado Springs. I know you're in real estate development. If there's ever anything that I can do, I'll be there. And he, it's one of those things in hindsight, I think that was a blessing as well. But he was developing the north end of Colorado Springs, has a ton of property there, and he was looking for a project manager to oversee the construction of a Bass Pro Shop. So, I was clear in my explanation. I said, hey, I'm moving there to start my own business. I don't know that I'm going to have enough time. So we actually made an agreement that it was going to be a part-time job, and I thought that he was the real estate developer, and we were just kind of like a construction manager was going to be overseeing a general contractor building this Bass Pro Shop.
Like an owner's rep. Yep.
Yeah, owner's rep, part-time job, whatever. So that part-time job quickly turned into about 120 hours a week because we were the general contractor. And it was a super small group, a $24 million project that had to be built in 10 months. And that first year, while it was challenging for sure, but I definitely had plenty to do. And again, in hindsight, it turned out to be a blessing. I got to meet some key subs, started vetting some, that process. We also at the same time started construction of our first home here in Colorado Springs that my wife and I built kind of on spec, but we lived in it for 3 years. So it was just an opportunity to get to know a different area. I mean, I can tell you a funny story on the first thing I had to do on this Bass Pro Shops was start putting an estimate together. And I'm coming from Louisiana. And, when I build an estimate, I just kind of start, you build it in your head. And so you're going through the list. Well, I've got an item, for termite treatment. And I plugged in a budget for that, no big deal. And I was reviewing that with the developer one day. He's like, "What is that?" I was like, "Termite treatment. We treat the slabs for termites." And he's like, "Do you know where you moved?" Colorado. He's like, we don't have to worry about that here. It's so dry. They can't live here. Where elevation's too high, all of that. He's like, so don't worry about that. Again,
but you just don't know, like territory. I mean, same here. We have subterranean termites. We have to plan for that. And unless, there's so much experience that goes into it. That's why your comment about moving to Colorado, I mean, there's just so much drastic change,
Yeah, coming from Louisiana, I didn't know what frost was.
Yeah.
Frost in the ground. I grew up in California, lived in Louisiana.
Ice dams on roof, like whatever it is,
Yep. So, again, just in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, all of those things give you experience. So there are things you don't know. You don't know what you don't know until somebody helps along the way and gives you some information. And you take all those little nuggets like we talked about with the Builder 20. My entire goal every meeting is just to come back with a list of 5 or 10 things that I want to implement. Things as simple as I posted earlier this week, Colby Construction prints their drawings and when they have their final bid set that's ready for construction, they just print it in a different color so they know nobody goes back and looks at the white paper that they've been looking at forever. When they actually go to construction, they change the colors. So again, just looking for those little nuggets.
Yeah, it's really smart. I mean, even just that example of changing the color. I mean, how many times have we all been on the job site and someone's building out the wrong set of plans? Or the clients called me and said, "Hey, Brad, you guys are building off the wrong set of planes." And it's not something we want to repeat, but I mean, it happens, right? And one of going back to, again, failure is part of the process. I mean, I look back early on in our career and we had an issue and again, this goes back to kind of the plan example, Tom, just these little nuggets of checking things and you just don't know what you don't know. And we had a framer that we had bid. They had bid the job. They're going to do the project. Great. Numbers great. We're in line. Let's move forward. Unbeknownst to us, on his own, here it's all turnkey framing, which means that I'm not buying lumber, trusses, or hardware. Like I hire the framer. He's buying it all. That's how Arizona market is. It's kind of unique. And the framer had contracted his truss company and said, "Hey, I'm doing this house. We're awarded. We need to get trusses." They're all, "Oh, we already had the plans from another builder, right, that was bidding." Unbeknownst to us as the GC, we were never notified. Framer didn't know he had a version that's like 6 versions old. I mean, it wasn't even close to where the final plans were. Builds the trusses, they come out and nothing lines up. And now, anyway, so I could go on about this for a long time, but it's those little things you just don't know, right? The QC checks to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And, how adamant now in our process that we have, the truss calcs, we're reviewing, we're checking mechanical. I mean, all these steps, it'll never happen again because we made that mistake.
Yep, for sure. And at the same time, again, some of the benefits of these platforms and social media and other things is that you now have the opportunity to learn from others' experiences. I have shared more than once with our team the experience that you had where the trusses, were 6 inches too high or whatever it was. And the fun that must have been, the sleepless nights that may have ensued from some of those things. I'm like, we're going to check all those details to make sure that we don't have to have that same costly mistake on our projects, and yet we've had plenty of our own that I would be more than happy to share, but your podcast isn't long enough for some of those.
The funny thing about that is a couple months ago, Adam, who's my senior construction manager, he does all my pre-con now, he sent it. So we have like a group text, kind of like company culture. We're texting each other all the time, like just, updates, fun stuff, memes, whatever, just like it's just kind of a culture thing. But he sent one and he said, it's really important to make sure you build your coffered ceiling before you lay your trusses down. And he had, because this house, we had to pull the trusses off. You see this house, it's totally framed, this beautiful coffered ceiling, and there's nothing above it, just blue skies. That would never happen except when you have to pull the trusses off. But, we all had a laugh about that. Going back to Colorado, though, I mean, you mentioned, did you have a strategy building your house? I mean, was that, and the reason I ask that is a lot of people say, okay, Brad, I'm starting out my company. Where do I start? And we all know that one of the easiest ways, right, is that you build a spec home, you work with some investors, you get some land, because now you got, boots on the ground, you have signs up, you have a piece that you can walk potential clients to that you're already building, as opposed to maybe just doing extensive remodels. And now you're trying to get a custom home you haven't done or you don't have in your portfolio, which makes it harder to make that jump quicker.
It's one of those elements that I wish I had spent a little bit more time and kind of established a clearer vision for what I wanted to do at that time, because it quickly became just doing whatever I had to do to bring in some money to help cover some bills at home. And that's one of those things that I think again, life lessons learned. Wish I had spent a little bit more time really putting that together. And at the same time, I think we all start that way. You take any job when you're young and you're just doing anything and everything. I remember taking jobs, which again, I'm grateful that people, took a risk on me and let me do some things. I know the first few jobs I did, I was doing trim work, doing a little remodel, doing all the woodwork myself. And yet I knew that wasn't what I wanted long-term. But it took a while before I really felt like I had a clear vision for what I wanted to do. And yet those opportunities just kept presenting themselves. So I will say I'm not a salesman. I'm not good at sales necessarily. I think I'm a whole lot better now than I was at the time. But building that first house was really more from my own experience. Granted, I'd had a ton of experience, built every kind of building. That's one of the benefits, I think, of a commercial background jumping into this, is that I wasn't afraid of any of the changes, any of the different types of construction, all kinds of things. We built all kinds of structures and buildings and different foundation types and all kinds of things in Louisiana. But that first home just really kind of, my family needed a place to live, so that was part of it. But it was really just to get that experience. It was my personal residence, so again, was able to get started kind of on my own, didn't have to bring in investors, didn't do anything from that standpoint. And yet it was kind of a jumping off point. The next one came from a lot that we actually had owned, and my dad had helped me get started there as well, who's also been a huge influence in my life. But there was a lot that we had actually purchased because my sister was considering building, and then they decided not to. And we were able to sell the lot to another client who I refer to them as my first official client. And we were able to put that home in the parade of homes here with our local HBA. And that led to, probably 2 or 3 more clients that came through the parade of homes that were ready for us to do something. And so that one project grew into 2 more, and then those 2 grew into 3 more. And so it's just been a kind of a gradual growth, and yet through all of that experience is when you really, for me at least personally, it's where you start to get that vision of like, what do we want to be doing? What do I want to focus on? I can't go take the $4,000 or $5,000 laundry room remodel that I was doing when I was first getting started, just looking to bring some income in. Now we can't even consider some of those smaller projects just because of our growth and where we are now.
So I've had 3 guests now, you, Casey at Raycon in Utah, and Mark D. Williams in Minnesota, that have all have parade homes, and the amount of success and how they speak about the parade. I need to recruit you guys to help us in Phoenix. We don't have one. And you'd think of Phoenix like you would have a parade of homes. But again, speak to the benefit just of getting, it's one thing to have your sign up, you're building a house, you have your first client on the lot, but just the impact, the catapult that made having a parade of homes and living, breathing product with people touring that.
Definitely. I mean, there's pros and cons to it for sure. It's one, we've joked, we have not done what Casey's done, where I forget.
What are you doing every year? He does 1 or 2 every year.
1 or 2 every year. It's one of those things where we do one and then we're like, okay, we're good for a few years. I now remember what it's like.
The stress. Yeah.
And at the same time, absolutely, there's benefits to it. It's not, we've actually only done 2 in the 10 years that I've been here in Colorado Springs. And yet even if you get one job from them, it's probably worth the time and the effort. But construction is very much a, touch and feel industry. There's, if a client can see what you're capable of doing, it's so much easier for them to establish that trust, be confident in what you're trying to say that you can do in a manner that's way better than me just telling you, yeah, I know how to build a home. Take my word for it. But when you can actually touch and feel and see the difference, and there is a feeling that, I think higher quality construction, just like what we just experienced visiting Colby Construction's home in Wisconsin, you can totally feel the difference between a high quality home and a low quality home. In my standpoint, that's one of the things I think the Parade of Homes really helps get your product out there for people to see. Our parade isn't huge here. I'm super familiar with been attending the St. George, Utah Parade of Homes for a long time, and some of the Utah Valley Parade of Homes.
You and I just missed each other a couple of years ago on the Utah Valley one.
Yeah, again, I think it's invaluable to have that many people see your product.
So let me ask you this. I mean, for those of us such as myself, so maybe this is your advice to give to someone such as myself, right? When we don't have a Parade of Homes, and, see, touch, feel is really important. How does a company, or how do you kind of show what you're capable of doing? Maybe it has to do with your marketing strategy. I mean, whether your marketing strategies, I know social media, you're very active on now. Early on, like, how did you market your company, and how has that evolved in the last few years?
I would say there are a couple of things. So in addition to the Parade of Homes, which again has its own pros and cons, benefits, we have done a few other things that I actually think are probably as effective. One of the things that's really hard to quantify with the Parade of Homes is it worth it? I've had people ask that, and it's just really hard to put a number to it, to say, we might get 8,000 or 10,000 people through a home and get 8 to 10
leads,
pretty good leads that might lead to 3 projects. So as a percentage of the number of people coming through a home compared to the projects you get, it's a really low percentage. We've done a couple, whether it's because the home doesn't fit the time frame, you're very schedule driven on the Parade of Homes. It's a make or break date. And we've done some other things where we've just held kind of our own open house. We haven't done it yet. We've talked about partnering with a few other builders in the area who have similar principles and values, and saying, hey, if we can all finish a few homes in November, and maybe do a pre-Christmas like walkthrough. There are other opportunities. We've had good success with just holding an open house for a few days if the client's okay with it, after they kind of finish getting things staged and things are looking right. For 2 or 3 nights, we'll open it up to realtors, and I've posted on social media like, hey, we're having a food truck in the driveway, come get free dinner and come walk through our homes. So it's a much more targeted approach, where we'll reach out to some specific clients that we're working with that might be on the fence as to whether or not they're going to build with us, and just be able to take them through, have a few of our past clients there so that they can talk to them. I feel like our past clients are some of our best resources in terms of being able to talk about their experience and how they felt about the overall process, as well as our trade partners. I feel like they are an invaluable resource that are often overlooked, but they're working for multiple builders. And so they're a great resource for you to talk to as a builder, to have them at those events so that, potential clients can all, get a feel for who this potential builder is. And if they, client, it's the trust thing of, when a client comes and says, hey, I want to build my dream home with you, that's often, other than business, that's their biggest investment, most money that they're going to spend on anything. And you're putting a ton of trust in that builder.
I love that you shared that. It's interesting because as you were speaking about just kind of that, who you can invite to an open house. So early on in my career, it just triggered something. When we finished really kind of one of our signature projects that we finished, and it kind of put us on the map in a certain part of town, and it was like nationally published, this house. Cambria, right? Cambria Countertop. I mean, they, looking at your vendors, what they do is that if the whole house is Cambria, which it was, this one happened to be, they'll do like they'll sponsor like the drinks and beverages, right? And the food. So they'll do an open house. You can invite people. So our clients, again, probably similar to yours, were amazing. They're like, yeah, we'll do the open house, bring everyone over. And so again, everyone came, and it was just the event, the atmosphere is so different, because it's not like a parade where there's a ton of homes and you're just filtering people through, right? Looky-loos a lot of times. Yep. It's more targeted, that sniper approach, as you mentioned. I mean, as you're thinking about this, one thing I didn't do at that event, but I'm going to think about doing now with some of my clients, is you said past clients. And first, that's so big, because anyone that's inviting past clients, they're your biggest salespeople. And even when this home went on sale recently, because we're building for them again now on their second home, like my former clients have known that house. So they're telling their friends, hey, this house is going for sale. Like, go buy it. Brokers and realtors, because they're connected. They're typically the first ones getting the leads on land. As you mentioned, your trade partners, which it's so funny, because the relationships with our trade partners are important, because sometimes I look at some of my suppliers, clients will go in off the street and they're like, hey, you need to go with this builder, right? And so leads can come from them. And then, of course, your design and architecture team. So you can really target, who's coming through. And we're doing one now. We've been fortunate to do Mark La Liberte's house and then Zero House, who came and spoke to us, when we were in Nashville, you and I. And his open house is going to be right before Thanksgiving. I'm really excited about it. And we're going to now target a few that you have on here that I wasn't even thinking about, but I'm going to invite them out, because to see this building science house and, that excitement and, again, see, touch, feel, right? That's the goal that we're trying to accomplish here.
For sure. And one of the other things that I think it was an architectural firm that talked to me about this once, of turning those into a charitable event as well.
That's what we're doing.
To drive, I think opportunities to give back and to an organization. It could be a trade school. It could be, any of those things that you can also turn it into something good and positive. You'll get more people in, and they see that you're about much more than just building the home. You're building the industry, building the culture, building anything that you can do to really give back. I think goes a long way.
So Evan Crow, whose episode comes out next, he spoke about this. Like, he donates all the time in his local area. Like, he's really active as in communicating, sponsoring, kids teams and, the school and other things. And it just helps branding, right? Because it shows that he's involved in his community. But to your point, Tom, like, we've associated ourselves with Your Iconic Life, which is a magazine down here, and we're trying to fundraise $10,000, right, for a non-profit charity. So ticket sales, and there's a lot of things you could do that 100% proceeds go to them, and then we provide everything else, right, just as a service thing. And I love that aspect. And going back to the sales thing, and you made this comment earlier. I made a note, Thomas, that you had mentioned that you made the comment that you're a much better sales guy today than you were at the beginning. What's interesting, like, you're a super personable guy, like, you're outgoing, super knowledgeable. So it seemed like you're an amazing sales guy. You've always been that way. But maybe I relate it to me that I look at my sales process today in pre-con, and what I found is that, like, experience changes that, right? Like, going back to the failures I've had where something goes wrong, I can speak with a lot more confidence now when a client maybe history is repeating itself and they're taking me a direction I know it's not going to work. So I think a lot of the sales process just comes with time and experience, that we've all had to put in that time to some extent.
For sure. And I think you hit on a key point there too. I would attribute a lot of it as well to confidence. You learn your process, you learn or you develop your process over time. And I think it's important to recognize too that not everybody is a good fit. When I think in your recent podcast with Toby Cornell talked about, that aspect. Not everybody's a good fit. When you're first starting, you're trying to take every job, just because you're afraid of, where the next one's coming from. But having that experience and that confidence that comes over time, like, I'm not trying to sell myself to the wrong client. I'm just trying to put ourselves out there. Like, this is what we do. This is our team. This is what we have developed and what we're good at. And if you feel like you're a good fit, then we're absolutely ready to go forward. And at the same time, we talk about the interview process that as you're presenting yourself, whether to a client, it's a two-way street. It's a long-term relationship, and you want it to be the right fit. It should all be fun. If not everybody gets to build these custom dream homes, and the process should be fun. It shouldn't become this nightmare, and that we hear about way too much in our industry. And so the sales side for me really, I feel like I'm better at it now because I know what I'm selling. I know who we are, what we're doing, what I want to be doing, and I know what our strengths are. I know what our weaknesses are. We're not perfect. I'll explain that. I'm not afraid to share some of that information. Like, I've told clients often too, we have no idea what your house is going to cost. We've gone to a total cost plus model. We are pretty detailed in our estimating, but nobody can sit there and tell you what this house is going to cost to build over the next 2.5 years because we have no clue. We have no control over half of it.
Yeah, and in some cases, it may work in your favor. We've seen lumber come down, but at the same time, you're dealing with unknowns where things can go up. And there's, as you mentioned, it's an estimate. But what's interesting is the angle you took on the sales process. It didn't ring until like you explained it this way. Is that we all know that some people may, be born to be outgoing, or they may have attributes, right? And that, yeah, there's some charismatic side to like selling a product, but the core of it, like the meat of it, as you mentioned, is one, like I was kind of going down the road of experience, but you're even more saying not only that, but what you're selling, like, the product, like, the process. And more importantly, you understand when a client's not the right fit, you're vetting them that, hey, I don't need to oversell myself. And that's a key part, because it's one thing to sell us, as a company and our team and what we're doing. But if we're not vetting the client properly and making sure it's a win-win, like it doesn't matter the sales process and even your systems to some extent, things can go sideways. So how are there red flags? Like what are certain things, and maybe it comes down to the size of your team and backlog and what you can hold, but, size of your team, backlog, as well as, what are some key personality or questions or things you're looking at when you're interviewing clients?
That's a great question. And I think one of my favorite experiences recently with our team has been just a simple exercise that we went through in one of our meetings. We identified, fortunately, I don't have to name any names on this one.
We won't hold you to it. Yeah.
Our top 3 clients, and then went through, everybody just, was able to share what made them our top 3 clients. Who are your favorites and why? Identified a few personality traits, a few characteristics, different things. Then we went through the same exact exercise, like, okay, who are the 3 toughest clients that we've had and why? And went through that process, and that helped us identify some of those red flags. And so now those are things that I specifically look for. As I typically handle the pre-construction process and a meeting with clients, early on. And those are things that I'm now actively looking for to say, you know what? I'm watching how that client is interacting between the two of them, because if they don't treat each other fairly well, they're definitely not going to treat their builder very well. So just watching for some of those things. And again, we kind of start our process with an actual survey that just gives us some information about, have they built before? That's one of those things that has been a positive experience with clients that we've worked for. And is this the first time that you've ever built a home? Are your budgets realistic? Are they flexible right now? They have to be. Some of those things, or if they're not flexible, then we've got to start at a much lower, target, because things are going to increase. There are going to be things that come up that change. So you're just watching for those red flags. And it's one of those things now I think we all have that mindset in construction a little bit. Like if you were around for 2008, it's still fresh in everybody's minds. You think that I've got to take every job, when really some of the best jobs are the ones you don't get, because they just can become nightmares and not anything you want to deal with, and they kind of fall in the life's too short category. So just being able to recognize that and know that, not everybody's the right fit for what you specifically have to offer, gives you the confidence to make sure you're, always trying to work for the right clients and be able to bring value to them.
So why Lost Creek? Like, what does Lost Creek have to do with the company itself?
That's also a great question, and a little bit personal. So one of our core values is our legacy. It always has been. It's been something that's always kind of been important to me. And the one thing I love about legacy is that it brings different feelings and thoughts that deal with both the past, the present, today, and the future. When I was deciding, when I made this decision to go into business for myself and had to come up with a name, my grandparents were hugely influential in my childhood, as well as my parents, and wanted to do something that gave me a daily reminder of them. And so my grandfather had a cattle ranch. My grandfather was an entrepreneur himself. He had a lumber company in the Bay Area of California, and had kind of a cattle business that was a little bit more of a side hobby business, but it was a big business in a ranch in an area in central Utah where he grew up. And the name of that area where this ranch was is Lost Creek. And so, I grew up going summers there. We do old-fashioned cattle drives, getting out on horses and moving cows a couple times a year. And so I just have great memories. But it's, for me, Lost Creek serves as a daily reminder of that legacy that I come from, as well as the legacy that I am trying to leave for my family right now and my future family. And again, we try to instill that in the rest of our team as well, into the buildings that we build. We want these buildings to last. And legacy is again, that core value that just reminds us of what we're trying to do. We're trying to build something bigger than just homes.
So any secrets or recommendation? I mean, building company culture, and this is something we've spent a lot of time on the podcast. I mean, it can be very difficult, right? Especially you have a lot of different personalities, and you'll have training things. We're trying not to kick all of our employees off a pier and say swim, like trying to figure out some process, right? So they can at least be successful. And then also the reality is, just like you did, you went off on your own. All companies, you may lose key personnel at some point. How do you instill good company culture legacy? Because you, as you can tell, just listen to you, Tom, on the podcast. I mean, you have this passion about legacy, and hence Lost Creek. I mean, it's great to understand kind of how that name really plays into like who you are as a person and the brand. How do you instill that in the people that represent you on a day-to-day basis?
That's an element that I can tell you. It takes time, and yet it also takes the right people that can share in that same vision, and so not everybody's a perfect fit from an employee standpoint, and there is some turnover, and there's growth that comes from all of those things. I think there's also an element for me that comes from, like, there are things that I know that I'm good at. I have strengths, and there's things that I am terrible at. Organization and structure and processes is not one of my strengths, and yet I know we need them. That's one of those things where I can look back at the beginning, and even still, there's probably a little bit too much that's in my head. And that has probably cost me some employees, that like I wasn't clear about those expectations, and we didn't have defined systems and processes, and even roles and responsibilities. I can actually remember, so when we first started, we were pretty small. I was obviously very small when I first started. I was by myself. And at the same time, Brett Dawson, who's one of my key employees, and we've worked together almost the entire time that I've been here in Colorado. For the first couple of years, he was on his own, and we just kind of worked as an independent contractor. He's been a full-time employee for 6 or 7 years, I think now. And again, just shared, we worked together really well. Well, and then as we started adding some more, we both realized that, hey, everything we're trying to do is in our heads, and we've really got to structure something different. I can remember when we first printed business cards, we did not have titles on them on purpose. And we would talk about how we all wear different hats, and it's just we all just do whatever we have to do to get done. Well, I've learned that was bad. Everybody needs to know their position, their role, their responsibility. I'm a huge fan of Jim Collins and the book Good to Great.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And his concept of, I forget exactly what they called it, but it was basically, you get the right people on the bus, and then you figure out where the bus is going. Well, that's how I always remembered reading it. I learned later on, I'm like, there's another key element, and it's you get the right people in the right seats on the bus. And so having those developing roles and responsibilities and structure of who's responsible for what and what those things look like, developing checklists so that we're not making the same mistakes over and over again because we forgot again. And so it's really, it takes time, takes a lot of effort. You do have to spend time working on the business. People talk about that all the time. There's a difference between working in your business and working on your business, and you really have to dedicate time. That's one of the statistics we report in our Builder 20 group. is how much time did you spend, or what's your average time per week spent working on the business and not in the business?
I love that. What's interesting, and going back to the business card example that you gave there, Tom, what's interesting about that is what I've seen, and just the importance of that. As you think about title, not only does it impact the employee themselves, right, to understand their title. Like, this is my title. I remember when I came out of college, and you're superintendent or project manager, like, you just feel not just an authority, but it's like there's like a mantle that I want to live up to and honor that to an extent, right? But even on the flip side, I've seen like Spencer, who's my director of operations, with that title, and as he makes calls to clients that we have or trade partners or suppliers, he actually can get a lot done. And it's not that the super can't, but just that level of accountability that he has in that title, same as me, Colin, right? As the owner, that there is going to be a little weight moved around, if you will, that him making that call, it actually goes somewhere. And people are like, this is the director of ops. I need to, make sure our ducks in a row. And so there is some authority there that's really important to that. So I'm glad you shared that, because if you're all wearing too many hats, people will be like, does Tom and Brett, it's Brett, you said, and, they're kind of running around. Who knows what they're doing?
It leaves too many gaps, because it's like, oh, I thought you were doing that. And
yeah. Who's doing accounting? Yeah. Who's doing change orders?
Too much of that, probably. Think about it more. But the other thing I think that's hugely beneficial is, especially as we're looking to reach out to hire some younger people right now to join our organization, but it gives them a clear path as well as what's next. Where do I go next from here? If I'm starting as an assistant superintendent, what is that path, so that maybe I can be that director of operations in 10 years or whatever that might be. So I think that's the other critical element of having good company and organizational structure that again gives employees something to work for.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll share on this, what's interesting is you mentioned about just growth, right? And as you hire better people, right? What's interesting, one of my main mentors who passed away this past summer, Dave Clark, who I had on the podcast, he would always tell me, and this is nothing personal, like anyone that's been here, but he'd always say, every time you hire someone better than who was before. And it kind of goes back, he was big. He made me read that Jim Collins, Good to Great. And it goes back to analogy, have the right person on the bus in the right seat. A lot of that's on us as owners to have the systems in place. Additionally, as we lose a key person, find someone better, right? And it's nothing against the person that left, but as I look at our business, like, we have great people and it continues to get refined. And now this kind of is your example on the sales thing, Tom, is that I know more about what I'm looking for in a potential client because I understand the process more. I understand the experience side, but also with employees, I understand the gap we needed and who I'm looking for. And so you have to use all that. So, I mean, just amazing information you shared, Tom.
It's true. And I think on the flip side too, one of the things that can be detrimental to your culture is keeping the wrong team player for too long. That can have a hugely negative impact that can wipe out years of effort to build that culture. So you have to watch that. I know one of the seminars I attended at the Builder Show this last year, that the phrase that stuck with me was hire fast, fire faster, and promote fastest.
Yeah. I like that. That's good. I'm going to have to remember that one too. And to that point, I mean, I'm a big sports guy. You look at these, big football teams or basketball teams, you have someone that has preferential treatment or is not, they may be super talented, but they can just kill the culture. And it's the same thing to us as business owners. So outside of all the complexity of the business stuff we ran down, today on the episode, Tom, what do you do for fun?
So I didn't mention I've got 5 kids, not quite as many as you, but they keep us busy. So I love hanging out with them. It's crazy how fast time goes. I've got our 2 oldest are now out of the house, and
that's crazy. I can't believe that.
Whole new element for me because I don't feel like it was that long ago that I left college.
Yeah.
And so I love to hang out with my family. We live out on some property and have horses and raise some cows every once in a while. So when I'm not at work, I like to work.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things plenty of chores at home.
So when you're not at work, you enjoy working on the ranch, like as if you're not busy enough, right?
I do. And going back to even the talking about Lost Creek and the name, and on our property, I built a barn that actually is kind of a similar model to the barn that was on my grandpa's ranch. So I get cool. That daily reminder as well. But so love hanging out with kids and my wife. We like to travel. We COVID started a new generation of our travel. We bought an RV, and we actually still haven't taken it outside of the state of Colorado, which is a great part about where we live. We can get to some pretty amazing places here close by. So we love to get out and glamp. I'm not a tent camper, so that's one of the reasons for the RV. Love sports, love hanging out with family, and again, so anything that I can do to help others as well. So,
well, I think you're the only cattle rancher I know that is a glamper. So there's that.
I'll take that title. So.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. So what do you?
Very much a fair weather camper. So.
Hey, that's a good strategy. So what do you have that's upcoming and exciting? And then also, where can our listeners find you?
Absolutely. So we've got some really fun and exciting projects in the pipeline. We've got some new architects that we're working with that we're excited about as we kind of trying to step into some different markets. And again, so work will continue to grow. And again, just excited for the future of where we're headed. You can find me. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with that whole social media thing, but it has been a very good thing. I manage my own Instagram account, so anything that you see on social media from us at Lost Creek CO is usually me behind the scenes, and also on our website and Instagram are our primary locations. We're on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm trying to, based on your advice, trying to up my game a little bit on LinkedIn, but anyway, that's where you can find us. And if you're ever in Colorado Springs, you can find us at our office. Give us enough notice, and we'll have some fresh cookies out of the oven, or some. If you give us a couple of days' notice, we'll have some pizza out of the pizza oven. So.
Well, I'm taking that on at some point. So, Tom, you've been amazing, man. I can't thank you enough for making time today.
Oh, thank you, Brad. We appreciate it for sure. Appreciate all you do.